What's going on, everyone, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of JB RC, a special episode, and I'm taking you guys on a little time travel adventure. We're going back about 20 plus years to what started everything for me in this hobby. 20 plus years ago, RJ Speed Legends car. Back then it was a Bolink Legends car. This is what started the RC addiction for me. This is what got me into the hobby, and here we are 20 years later still racing and running a YouTube channel. So super excited to get to relive this. It's going to be a super nostalgic project for me. There is a photo of me that exists as a kid with my first Bolink Legends car. Cannot find it. So a shout out to my son for standing in, helping me recreate this little vintage throwback photo with him serving as a stand-in for me. I appreciate it, buddy. This video, we're going to cover the build of the car. We're going to start from the, unboxing the car kit. We're going to build it, get the electronics in it, so on and so forth. I do some things differently. So if you've got one of these and thought, hey, I've already built one, the video may still be worth a watch for you because I'm going to do some pretty unique things to this car. I'm not going to put it together exactly as they say in the manual with the servo tape, this and that and the other. We're going to do some upgrades while we're building it. Shout out to my race sponsor, Moonville RC and Hobby, for helping me, giving me the hookup on this car. We're doing a budget build. All I had to pay for was the car kit, a set of bearings. Everything else I'm using as spare parts that I've got in the RC spare parts box. So shout out to my race sponsor, not channel sponsor, gotta say it, for hooking me up and helping me out with this project and be able to relive my childhood. But again, we're gonna cover the build, and then I just wanna let you guys know we're gonna be covering some racing with this car as well as other classes on some indoor carpet oval tracks at some tracks and locations that have not yet been featured on the channel. I've been wanting to get out to some of these places for a while. The opportunity is finally presenting itself, and that's what we're going to do. So keep an eye on the channel for the within the next several weeks. I'm going to be going out and get some racing footage with this, and super excited to share those adventures with you guys as well. But with all that said, guys, let's jump right into it. And here we go. It's super excited to bring you guys another build tutorial. I enjoy doing these. Of course, this is the RJ Speed Legends car, like I said in the intro. Cool backstory, how I got into racing 20-something plus years ago. I was just a kid. Visited the Hobby Connection in Easley, South Carolina, and David, the current owner, his father, is the one that actually showed me around the hobby store, and he took me around on the back side of the building and showed me the racetrack that they had. And, the paved oval they still have currently being used today, well over 20-something years later. And I told my dad I wanted one. I used some money that I had saved up. My dad helped me pay for it, and history was written. Here we are 20 years later, still racing and doing a YouTube channel about RC cars. So let's go ahead and jump into the build, talk a little bit here. These are the two servos I was going to choose from. I was doing kind of a budget build here. I did get this race car kit from my race sponsor, which is Moonville Hobbies. And I was going to do a budget build. I had a lot of spare parts sitting in a spare parts box, RC spare parts box. And basically, I needed the car kit, and I pretty much had everything else already that I was going to put into it, including these two servos. Was not sure which one I was going to use up front. And another thing we're doing is we're actually putting ceramic bearings in instead of using the brass bushings that come with the car. We're just going to get it freed up a little bit. The class that I'm going to be running, it will be legal to do so. Another thing that I'm going to do is instead of the servo, the directions call for using sticky tape. We're actually going to mount it to the platform pan car style. I'm going to use some actual servo mounts for that, and I will show you the part number and which particular servo mounts I used for this build later on in the video. But with all that said, let's go ahead and open up the box. I'm going to show you the contents, and it's really cool to be doing the voiceover for this video and kind of watching some of the filming that I did. And again, just super nostalgic for me. Like I said, this is what started this entire hobby and RC craze for myself, was one of these cars. But again, back in the day, it was the Bolink Legends cars. One thing I do want to say that I found interesting is once I got into the box and started building the kit, there are some differences. Either my memory is bad or RJ Speed did make some updates to the chassis itself. I'll try to cover some of those during the video as well. I could be mistaken. Like I said, I haven't held a true Bolink Legends car in years, but some of the features on this car I think may have been updated, but again, I could be wrong as well.
But we're going to get this box, we're going to go over some of the contents, and then we're going to start the actual build. Now, whenever you open up this car kit, pretty much what it's going to come with, of course, is the manual and directions and all that good stuff. Some window paint masks there, some zip ties for your battery, some servo tape, stuff like that. So it's cool they give you all that. A lot of that I'm not going to use. But then the car kit did come with a body. Got a coupe there. I forgot what particular model that is. It's written on the box. Doing the voiceover, I can't remember what the actual year and make and model it was supposed to be in, but they call it out on the box. But you do get a clear body with the kit, so you do get that up front. You're going to get some foam racing tires. They are yellow stripes. They look like BSRs, but I can't 100% confirm that, but it looks like it. But we're going to be doing a retro paint job. We're going to be doing a throwback to my first ever Legends car that I ever owned, and we'll go over that more here in a little bit later. So there are the foam tires that come with the car I was telling you about. Again, they are yellow stripe. I believe those are BSR tires, but I could be wrong. And then once we get this portion unwrapped, that is going to be your chassis kit. There's not a whole lot to these the Bolink or RJ Speed Legends cars. I mean, it's literally a differential, a couple metal components for like your front suspension, and then the rest of it is like a graphite chassis that consists of a center chassis plate, 2 side plates, and some plastic dowels that you're going to run across and build them that way. Those bags you got there, that's for the rear end differential, and then the front end kit that I'm holding there. These cars come with, if you can see those little bent metal rods right there, those are your steering rods. And the way these are designed to go in is you hook it through your servo saver, then you hook it through your steering linkage, and then you actually use a little collar with a set screw, and then you take that set screw, run it down, tighten it up, set your toe and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to use this in the build. Like you saw earlier, I'm going to be doing some ceramic bearings, doing an update to the car, doing actual servo mounts, and we're going to be doing some actual turnbuckle steering links on this car. Because again, I've got a ton of spare parts in my spare RC parts box. So like I said, this was a budget and fun build for me to give me something to go race and do over the winter and visit some tracks I've never visited before. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to be prepping the chassis plates and getting them together. I do want to let you know up front, my kit was very tight fitting. I could not push those little tabs from that center plate into the side plates. I was going to have to remove a little bit of material, and you don't really want it to be tight because these cars have no suspension. The only suspension these cars have are front springs. So you actually have to let the chassis do the suspension work for you. So you're going to see I'm going to start sanding off some of those tabs, and I'm going to hit all 6 of those tabs. There's 3 tabs on each side. And we're going to sand those down a little bit, get that cleared up, and then it will fit in the chassis plate. And again, I mean, you don't want it to be like crazy loose, but you don't want it to be super tight. You're actually going to want the chassis to flex, and we will talk about that actually at the end of the video. So we're going to get all that cleared up. Already did some sanding there, just kind of rolled and beveled the edges a little bit. Had to remove just a slight amount of material on the front and back side, and then it should slide right into that. And if you're having to use a lot of force, you're going to have to remove material like I did, because like I said, you do not want this thing to be rigid. The chassis is going to actually end up being part of the suspension. And again, more on that later. But a little bit of fitting, that's to be expected. You know, anytime you're building a RC kit, especially something that comes from, like graphite, carbon fiber. Some kits are more precisionally made and built. Some kits, require a little bit of fitting. There's not a car RC car that I use in a racing aspect that I don't go through and check and make sure, like we've talked about in several of my other build tutorials and so on and so forth. You want everything to move and fit properly, freely, and as little friction as you can possibly get. So now, right there, that's what I'm kind of talking about is, you're going to probably want the chassis to flex a little bit. The chassis is going to serve as part of the suspension. I remember the old tricks that we used back in the day on the paved oval, and that's where we would run a screw. You'd build the chassis, and now you can see everything fit right there real good. and easy. But you would put the chassis together, tighten everything down, then you would go back and take a full round out of each screw, sometimes more, all the way around on the car, and that would let the car chassis kind of flex a little bit, which will benefit with these cars generally. At least it did back in the day, because it's a solid rear axle design with absolutely no rear suspension whatsoever. Even the front end is literally just 2 springs on 2 metal pins. That's it. But that's pretty much what we're going to do from here. We're going to take those are the plastic dowels, the cross braces I was telling you about. So we're going to go ahead and start installing those. And then we're just going to kind of speed up the footage and get through this process here. But for the sake of the actual build up front, I don't tighten them like extremely tight, but I pretty much do run the screws all the way in from the front to rear. There's several of those cross brace little dowel rods there. And once you get all those in, then you'll slide in the battery tray or center tray, whatever you want to call it, and then you will screw the other side on as well. And you'll see some of that here too. So there's going to be a good bit of sped up footage in this video because I don't want to bore you with like a lot of the repetitive steps, but I'm going to show you some of the steps, and then we're going to kind of just buzz through a lot of these like we did here. So here, now you can see we got all the dowels on one side. Okay, so at this point, that other part I'm holding it in my hand, that is like your control arms or front lower A arms or whatever you want to call it for this car. And it's just got a little slot cut in the side chassis plates. It slides in. Now we're going to go ahead and put that the battery tray in, or the center tray, whatever you want to call it. And from that point there, all you got to do is you got to take the other side of the chassis, slide it over the control arm, and then you're going to slide it onto the battery tray, like you see me do here. You're going to kind of click it into place. And then you're going to be able to take the screws from the other side and run it in. Reviewing the manual there was something that looked a little bit different on the front end that I could not remember from years ago. So the manual's definitely handy. And the manual hadn't changed much from what I remember either, because it still calls for you to use the servo tape and so on and so forth. All right, so now we're going to start working on the front suspension. So you got a couple of those plastic steering blocks there. The car kit comes with a couple springs. I'm not exactly sure what weight they are. I wouldn't call them exactly super soft, but they're not really that stiff either. So I don't even know what weight they are. I'm going to probably order some 12th scale Pancar springs to have a spring kit for a little bit of tunability on this car. But other than that, there's not a whole lot you can do suspension tuning wise, other than some of the things we already talked about. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get that kingpin, the front kingpin for the front suspension ready. Clever design, a nut that runs up on the threaded end. It still has the slot at the top for the E-clip. And then you're going to take that, run it down on the top side of that control arm. Then you're going to take another nut and drive it onto the bottom side. Now, one thing I did not cover in the video here is something that I did end up going back and doing. And that's actually I take the kingpins back off the car and I polish them. Why did I do that? The knuckles, the steering knuckles or the steering blocks were extremely tight on those kingpins. So what I ended up doing is, you're going to see here in a little bit, I'm going to take a reamer, I'm going to ream out the steering blocks. And then I do cover that, but I did not cover me polishing the actual kingpins. I use the same old Pancar method that I've used in the past. I basically put them in a Dremel, secure them carefully, and then take some wet dry sandpaper, a little bit of rim oil, spray it down, and hit the Dremel, turn it on, and just kind of move that sandpaper out and back. And go from, I usually start out around, 400, 600, something like that. Usually run it up to 2,000 with a few different passes just to get it polished up. Remove a little bit of material, make everything, polished, smooth, and as frictionless as you can get, like we've talked about in many other videos. So here we are again at the little front steering blocks. The actual front axle, another pretty cool design. I can't remember if this is how the Bolink was back in the day too or not, but that front axle actually has a spline on the back side. So you actually run an E-clip on it, then you're going to slide that front axle through the steering block, and you're going to get it so far and it's going to stop. That's because the spline has to be kind of press fitted. Don't even really need a tool for it. What I did is I just took it over to an edge of a counter or table or whatever, protect the surface, and then just kind of press the steering block down onto the splined axle. like I just did there. Now it's flush and even, so it's ready to go. So super easy to do there, and that'll help you be able to tighten it up and loosen it up with the actual axle nuts whenever you put the tires on, and so on and so forth. So another thing you do want to be wary of here, there are different size screws. Most of the screws are larger than the front bumper screws that I'm using here. That's the reason I kind of gave you a little comparison there. So be wary of that whenever you're building the kit, because you don't want to open that hole up with a screw that's bigger. If you do, you will not be able to use those smaller screws that's designed for the bumper unless you're end up going to have to just add a nut to the back end of the screw. So pretty much, now we've got the front axle put into the front control arm, knuckle, steering block, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to slide it over. And again, this is before I polished everything. But I put it on there and I noticed, wow, this is kind of a tight fit. Again, like we talked about before, that's not going to work because this car has very little suspension as it is. So you want that knuckle, that little steering block, to be able to ride up and down that kingpin smoothly and easily and as frictionless as possible. Because what little suspension the car has, you do want it to be able to work. So I take one of my reaming tools. I keep a couple of these in my toolbox at all times, and then I'm just going to go ahead and start reaming that steering block out. Pretty cool little tool. I got a couple of these. I've had them for a few years now, and they're still nice and pretty sharp for the little cutting edges. So, also too, if you'd like me to do a video in the near future about MIP versus other wrenches and give you my own personal honest opinion on that topic, hit me up in the comment section below and let me know. Might be able to cover that in a future episode. So what we're going to do here is we're going to continue just reaming that out. We're going to do both of the steering blocks, get that freed up and everything, and then whenever we slide it back down, see, this is whenever I noticed like reaming it out really helped a lot, but I was like, we could use a little bit more, and that was the deciding factor for me that made me go back and decide to actually polish the kingpins themselves. Again, I didn't cover that on video, but my process is basically just put those kingpins in a Dremel, some wet dry sandpaper, some rim oil, some kind of lubrication you can put on the sandpaper, and start out, I don't know, 400, 600 grit and work your way to 2,000. That's pretty much my polishing routine for RC parts. So now basically what I'm doing is just trying to dry fit some parts. Some springs will go up under there. I do not have yet, but that is the upper cross brace for the front suspension. That's how the suspension is going to work. The spring is going to go on the top, and then that knuckle will be able to move up and down depending on the spring rate that you have. And those are the two different springs I got. One of them is the spring that came with the car kit, and one of them is one of my 10th scale pan car springs. And I noticed there's a diameter difference and a length difference on the springs. So that's the reason I've never raced 12th scale pan cars. But that's what's got me thinking, well, maybe this uses a 12th scale pan car front spring. I don't know. I don't even know if there's a 12th scale pan car springs. I've never raced them, so I'm going to do a little research on that because I would like a spring kit to go up front. Or potentially my 10th scale pan car springs will do the job. That way we do have some tunability, but we'll worry about that the closer we get to race day with this thing. So at this point here, at this part here, we're like, okay, we're pretty much ready to put the front suspension together. So we're going to go ahead and slide those springs onto the kingpins, and then we're going to slide that front suspension cross brace right over the top. And what you do to secure it in place is you take some E-clips that will secure to the top end of those kingpins. You're going to see me placing one right here. And my method, always just slide it in a little bit. Take you some long, fine needle nose pliers, and I use that to just kind of help me snap it into place. But you better watch those the E-clips, guys. I mean, if you're anybody that's done this several times already know, but some of these car kits comes with some that are just microscopically small, and you can lose them in a heartbeat. So always have extra E-clips if you can. If you don't, I recommend doing like I did for the build, having a white or at least a light colored background. So that way if you do drop something, you can easily find it, because those clips especially will disappear in a heartbeat. But now you can see how the suspension works. So the spring goes on top of it, and that's how the front suspension can work up and down. So what we're going to do now is the front end's pretty much done. We're going to add the front end, the turnbuckles later. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to be doing the adjustable turnbuckles and not the metal collar adjustable shims that the car kit comes with. Another thing I'm going to be doing is we're not going to be using the servo tape to secure the steering servo. That's how they call out to do it in the manual, and that's not how we're going to do it. I'm actually going to be putting some actual steering servo mounts in the car. And, I know it's a Legends car and it's limited and to what you can and can't do, but I want to give, some of the best that I had at it. And like I said, we were doing a budget build with this. I built this car with a lot of spare parts that I had just laying around in a box. The one specific thing I believe I did order for this car was the ceramic bearing kit. Everything else I had, it was just spare parts I had in a big box. And you're into this hobby as long as I do, and you're into the various types of RC racing and RC cars like I'm into, you accumulate a ton of spare parts. And it pays just to keep them in a box because, like I said, I nearly built this entire car kit with spare components. So what we're doing now is we're opening up the stuff for the rear end of the car. It has a aluminum solid rear axle. As you can see there, I thought it was going to be carbon fiber like the pan car. I was kind of surprised to see it was aluminum. And another thing we're going to have is adjustable ride heights. See, this is what I was telling you about earlier. I thought in the old Bolink Legends, there's simply a hole drilled there that the brass bushing slid into, and then you slid your axle through the bushing. That's correct. These cars came with brass bushings, no bearings at all. Even the front had bushings. But we're going to be using these ceramic bearings in there. But what I thought was cool is they do give you pan car adjustable ride height inserts. If I'm not mistaken, the car kit only came with the one specific ride heights, but I happen to have like several different sets of those pan car adjustable ride heights settings. So if I wanted to tune that, I can. But I am throwing the one that came with the kit in the car for this purpose. I do want to let you guys know ahead of time too. Again, that's the brass bushing that we would have used back in the day, but we're going with bearings. Another thing I do want to point out ahead of time is some additional fitting is about to be coming up. And we're going to be going over that here in a minute. But right there is the little ride height, adjustable ride height insert. Like I said, it's designed for pan cars. We're using it in this build too, but instead of that brass insert that you just saw me using, we're going to be using those ceramic bearings in the car instead. Just trying to get the car freed up and as smooth as we possibly can since, again, we're going to be running this in pretty much a breakout class, so anything to get it better, we will. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to push that adjustable ride height bushing in. It's not going to go in out of the car kit. I looked at it. I was like, there's just no way that this is going to go in and fit. It's just not going to happen. So much like we had to do with the battery tray or the cross brace, whatever you want to call it, earlier, we're going to have to do a little bit of minor fitting. So the fitting I'm going to do, you're going to see here in a moment. I'm going to take some sandpaper. I think I used 600 grit for this process, maybe 400 grit. I can't remember. Basically, whatever you have. You just don't want nothing fine. You want something that will remove a little bit of material. But I roll it over and fold it over, roll it over, whatever you got to do, and then I just start working it in and out on the side chassis plates where the insert needs to go. Didn't have to remove a lot of material, and I only removed enough for it to just kind of slide right in nice and easy. So here we go. I got my sandpaper, rolled up, and then we're just going to start working that. I was trying to pay attention to where it was hitting on that adjustable ride height bushing, and then I removed a little bit of material on the front side, back side, got that opened up, and then I noticed, oh, okay, I need to open up the rounded edge part a little bit too. And I believe I hit the top side primarily over the bottom whenever I did that. So it did take a little bit of fitment there too, so just letting you guys know ahead of time. But as you can see, I've already got that side in. It fits great. We're going to be finishing up the other side, and that's what it's going to look like. Once you get that ride height bushing installed, and there's your bearing, or if you're still using the brass bushing, that's fine too. So now we're going to go ahead and get the rear axle prepared, but there's one thing I want to point out. The left and right rear hubs are directional. They're not universal. You can't use it on one side. You can't use it on the other. The left side hub is going to have some pretty big holes on each side of the part where it slides over the axle, and that's so you can use set screws to mount it to that left side. Okay. The right side is going to have a recess that you can see that is meant to work with the the differential, the diff balls, the diff rings, and so on and so forth. So just take note of that. The rear hubs are not universal. The left side hub is the one that has 2 big holes in it. Okay. So we're going to start getting that prepared to be installed, and we're going to take those. Yep, here we go. We're going to go ahead and put those screws, get that tightened up. Here's some word of advice for you too. We talked about this during my several different pan car builds I've done on the channel. Whenever you start to tighten that down, do not slide that hub all the way up against the bearing or the bushing and wrench it down. You want to take it and slide that bushing back, or that hub back off that bushing or bearing or whatever you would be mounting it up against. You want just a very, very small amount of play there. You don't want it pressed up against it. You don't want it enough where the axle's sliding back and forth or nothing, but you don't want it pressed up against anything. Once again, like we talked about, and you're going to hear me say it many times talking about RC builds, you want the least amount of friction that you can get. So slide that thing off just a hair, just enough where it's got just a smidge of movement, okay? And then you can go ahead and run those set screws in and tighten it up. If you do it up against it, you're going to be causing some unnecessary friction and could be losing some speed, so on and so forth. For a breakout car, probably not as important, but like in my 17.5 pan car, very important whenever you're chasing, every little tenth that you can. So now that we got that part done, now we're going to start prepping the diff rings for the differential and the gear and all that. I've covered this pretty detailed in one of my pan car builds and so on and so forth. But pretty much my same method again, taking some sandpaper, going to spray some rim oil, whatever kind of good lubricating oil that you can have that you can put on sandpaper. And then I use that hub that's got that recessed part on it to hold those diff rings, and I'm just going to run it around that sandpaper. And I'm going to start with, like I said, usually, 600. I think I've even started out at 500 or 800 before. Depends on what I got on hand. But 400, 600, usually work my way up to 2,000 and get those diff rings polished up. What you're doing is you're removing any imperfections. You're getting them a little bit more precisely flat and, of course, polishing them. All right, so the kit came with a rear spur gear, a 48-pitch 81.2 spur, I believe it was. I'm going to be installing a 64-pitch 108.2 spur gear. Why, you may ask? I'm going to be putting a brushless system in here that I run in my breakout truck class. So I'm familiar with these gears. I'm going to be familiar with the same motor and ESC I'm going to be putting in this Legends car. So I figured, you know what, I'm just going to stick with the same gearing and turn my endpoints down the radio to get the car slowed down. And if I need to adjust a tooth or two to help with consistency, because believe it or not, that can make a difference in breakout racing, I can do that. The car kit came with some standard metal diff balls. These are not ceramics. That's something that you're going to find out later in the video. I'm actually going to go back and change. We're going to talk about that at the end of the video, but we're kind of following the directions here for this video. Or for this build. One thing that I thought that was kind of odd is the directions called out to put the diff balls in every other spur gear hole. I've always ran them pretty much all, in those upper diff ball holes. But I was like, let's follow the directions. I'm going to feel the diff. If I don't like it, I can change it later. And that's what we're going to end up doing later on, and I will cover that at the video end where I discuss a couple other changes I decided to do to the car. But I was like, for the sake of the directions, let's try it out and see what it does. Car also comes with a thrust bearing that's going to go on the outer side of the differential, which is going to be on the right rear hand side of the car. So we're going to have to get that kind of greased up and put in there too. You'll kind of see that whole process here in a minute. It's super easy. It was a little different than the pan cars because the pan cars used like standard bearings all the way through. First time I recall having to use a thrust bearing in this one again. But so as you can see, we're gonna go ahead and run that spur gear over. We got the diff balls in. I'm gonna take the diff ring, putting the polished sides up against the diff balls. Take special note of that. And then I'm going to start running that little insert there before the hub, line it up, make sure everything's set properly. And then we're going to start putting on the actual right rear wheel hub there. and then we're going to end up having to do the thrust bearing, and I believe there's a bushing and a washer that went on it too. I can't quite recall. But yeah, what we're going to do here is grease the thrust bearing. I ended up, for whatever reason of the build, I can't exactly remember my reason, but I ended up just using like diff ball grease again on it. But normally I would put, like on a thrust bearing, I would usually put my low C blue grease on there. But we went ahead and just put that on there while I had it out, I guess. So I can't really recall what made me decide to use that over the other stuff in this particular build, but it probably don't matter that much, at least not for this particular build. So once we got that on there, we're going to start sliding all that stuff on, and then like I said, you're going to have the thrust bearing. It seems like there's a bushing, and then a washer that we're going to just go ahead and assemble on the top end there. There's a washer that goes on each side of the thrust bearing. So that was the first one. There goes the thrust bearing itself, and then, well, the whole assembly is a thrust bearing, but you're going to have a washer on either side of it. So we have that in place. And then, like I said, it seems like, yeah, that's what it was. There it was. It was one other closing washer, and then the nut, I believe. Yep. So pretty simple. Like I said, it's a little bit different than a pan car, but very similar. But here we have it pretty much built. Axles in, the differentials put together, so we're pretty much good to go. Matter of fact, at this point here, we can go ahead and start bolting on the tires of the car and moving on to the next step of the build. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So now that we got everything on, also too, as far as building the differential for this car, currently I built it just like I build my pan cars. And I'm going to tell you this process as we're putting these foam tires on. What I generally do is I will check it once the tires are on the car. I will grab the left rear and right rear tire with both hands, and I will use my thumb in my right hand, and I will try to spin that spur gear. If that spur gear is very hard to spin or has just a slight slip to it, I'm like, okay, so that's nice and tight. Then I'll go over, I'll grab the spur gear, grab the right rear tire with my right hand, and I'll spin it and feel how smooth that diff is. If you got a spur gear that's pretty tight within the diff rings, but the differential moves freely and smoothly, you got a pretty good build there. Depending on your track surface, so on and so forth, you may end up having to back off on that the nut on that spur gear a little bit, and that's okay. But generally, that's the feel I'm looking for, and we're going to talk about that here shortly too, while we're getting these tires put on. But again, these are the yellow stripe foam tires. Again, they look like BSRs. I'm pretty confident that's what these are. But we're going to get these mounted, and it's going to start looking like we got a little retro Legends RC race car starting to come together now, starting to look like something. So we're going to get that on, run those screws in on that right rear, and then get ready to move on again. All right, so here we go. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to feel the diff a little bit and see what my thought is. I thought that the tire had a little bit of a wobble in it, but then I noticed it was how the foams were cut. The wheel was actually balanced really well. It was just some play because they cut the foam, put in a color strip, and they put in the other part of the foam. So it's pretty cool. But there was no warpage there. It was in the foam on the tire itself. So now you can kind of see how the front suspension works a little bit more. Now that we got tires on the car, and I can kind of press down on the chassis, you can see how everything moves around, so on and so forth. So I'm pretty happy with it. So now we're going to get the body out, and we're going to get it just kind of pre-mounted. What I'm going to end up doing is trimming all that plastic off around the outer edges, get the body trimmed up, get the body posts on the car. Super easy to do. Matter of fact, I think they're already on there at this point. And then get it trimmed out just like you see here. I did do a couple things differently with the body mounting. I don't want to say that I did things differently. There's several ways you can do it because some people actually run the nuts on the outer side to help hold the body on. I've got the nut on the inside adjusted using a body pin, as you can kind of see there. All right, so now we're going to be moving on and getting the servo installed. And again, instead of using servo tape, we're actually going to be mounting the actual servo mounts to the car, and we're going to be using my Futaba 9650 servo. Now what I did here that I want you to see is if you see that little mark towards the center, I measured out the chassis between the two plates on the battery tray and marked center. You want to get that steering servo as center as you can get it, as perfectly center as you can get it. So that's what I did. That's what that little bitty mark on the center of that cross brace there in the middle is on the battery tray area. That's my center mark for the steering servo. And we're going to be measuring out, and you're going to see here momentarily where I'm actually going to drill some holes in that area. And that is going to be for the servo mounts that I decided to use with this build. All right, here we go. So we got the servo mounts actually mounted on the servo. You can kind of see that I've already got the holes drilled into the cross plate there for the servo mounts. It was super easy to do. I just took my time, measured everything out, drilled holes. On that one hole, you're going to kind of see it almost ran into the corner there. That's the mounts I used. It was for Serpent, part number 500118. Those are the steering servo mounts that I used for this build. There were some spare parts that I had, but they worked out pretty much perfect for what I needed. I believe I had to clip off one edge of the outer end on one of those ears on that to clear the wire on the servo itself. But it was real easy to do. No issue there. But so you can see the holes there that I drilled out, measured everything out. Everything's ready to go on. And what we're going to be doing is actually mounting the servo on the bottom side of the car, like you see here. I've got it screwed in. And another thing that I actually did that I'm going to show you here in a moment is on the back side, those back two screws, I actually used some small nylon nuts between the servo mount and the chassis plate. And what that did is it throws just a slight bit angle. Okay, you should be able to see right. Let's see if we can get the camera angle right. I'm going to try to point out right there. There's little white Teflon screws between the servo mounts and the chassis plate. What that does, that puts that servo on a little bit of an angle, and that's going to help with the steering of the car a little bit, and so on and so forth. So, again, just moving over some of my pan car stuff over to the car, just taking some of my knowledge from the pan cars and applying it to the car, trying to make everything a little bit better that I can. Now from here, we're going to kind of find out where we want our electronics installed, checking out my wire links, how far back do I want it, where do I want my receiver, so on and so forth. And you're going to see the car again once I have everything mounted in and the wires attached and so on and so forth. But again, I decided I had a spare Hobby Wing Just Stock ESC. That's what's going in the car. That ESC's great for breakout racing. We use those ESCs in a lot of the racing we do around here. We do a lot of spec racing. I'm not a mod racer, at least not yet. But I just like the spec racing stuff personally. But here we got pretty much everything situated. So you can see I got like my servo wires and speed control wires and so on and so forth kind of coiled up, leading to the receiver and all that kind of stuff. So again, I went with the Hobby Wing Just Stock ESC, and I also had a Hobby Wing 21.5 motor. Both of these were spare parts I had in my spare RC part box. So this, yes, it costed me something somewhere down the line, but I don't know. I bet you I've had these for 3 years at this point. But they're sitting in there. I knew they were still good. I knew that everything still worked, so we're putting them in the car, and we're going to be using them. Kept me from having to buy some new electronics. So something to consider. If you got something that is still good, instead of selling it or something like that, maybe consider just keeping it in the spare parts box. You never know whenever you might be able to use something again. It allowed me to do a very, very good budget build with this Legends car. One thing I'm going to do off camera again is actually going to be doing the soldering and getting the motor wires soldered up, which you're going to see here. From this view here, the car's ready. I have the steering linkages on. Adjustable steering linkages, and just so you know, I used, again, they were spare parts I had in a parts box, but those are custom work steering linkages and custom work ball cups, ball ends that I used. They were spare that I had laying around. I like the Custom Works ball cups. I just always have. The fitment just seems some of the best that I've dealt with, and that's, my personal opinion. So I've always got plenty of spare ball cups for those, so that's what we ended up using. But now I can adjust the toe. I'm still gonna have, matter of fact, I need to go back and readjust the toe. But as you can see, we got everything set up. So the car's got steering again now, adjustable turnbuckles. We don't have to worry about those little sliding shim bushing collars and stuff like that we got to worry about now. We'll be able to adjust on the fly and do whatever we need to do. Got my motor soldered in. At this point, all I have to do is tape in a battery and this car's ready to rock and roll. But there is still one more thing that we need to do, and that is going to be prep and paint a beautiful Legends car body. So, again, like we talked about before in my intro, I'm doing a throwback, a nostalgic body. The first Legends car I ever had, it was a Hot Wheels car theme. And it was literally almost like a petty blue car with the Hot Wheels sticker on each side. And I had 2 straight pieces of white vinyl that I put on the roof to make the number 11. We're going to update the paint scheme. We're going to do it a little bit better. We're going to bring that paint scheme a throwback, but we're going to bring it into 2022, a little more modern and with my style. So with that said, let's get to it.
All right, everyone, and we are pretty much done. We got my paint job done here, and turned out really good. Give you a little tour of it. I'll share some pictures as well on the social media pages. We got my racing sponsors, my YouTube channel. Went back and, my retro theme to throwback from whenever I was a kid. I told you guys I did a blue Hot Wheels car. So real nostalgic here. Got my Moonville Hobby sponsorship on the front. Race sponsor, not channel sponsor, I have to say that. So what I did we talked about earlier in the video, as a kid, I had the car was just solid blue, solid petty blue, and had a big Hot Wheels sticker. There was no number on the door and had 11 on the top because that's all I had. So I kind of recreated my childhood car, but updated it with my numbers. Two-tone the blue, so we still have a petty light blue. It's not actually petty blue; it's a Tamiya light blue. And then a darker metallic blue that I added some metal flake, some additional metal flake and stuff into it as well. So real happy with how it turned out. And basically, before I let you go, I just want to go over a couple of things that I went back and added to the car or redid on the car from the video. So let me get this body off here and we'll talk about those areas. So the first thing that I did is I did find those linkages. I know we talked about that briefly, but I did find the linkages I needed for the steering. I need to go in and get the toe set to where I want it and everything. And the other thing I did is I went back in the car and I opened the diff back up. I did not like the way it felt. I followed the directions where it said put a diff ball every other ball. Got the differential put together, just didn't like the feel of it. I was just following directions to follow directions because I haven't built or ran one of these in well over 20-something years. So pulled the diff back apart, went ahead and put in some ceramic bearings, some ceramic diff balls all the way around on the spur gear, got the diff put back together, and it feels so much better now. It's a lot more smooth, feels like it should. It's nice and tight here, but the differential is really smooth. So real happy with that. So that was just a couple things I went back and did that we were talking about, and super excited to run this. I may go ahead and try to run it with these yellow stripes the first time out. I've talked to a couple buddies of mine, and they seem to recommend the purple stripes, I think it's the spec purple stripes or something. So I may get contact Moonville and have them order me a set of purple stripes, and then I may try those CRC rubber tires on here as well. Now, the other thing that we talked about in the video is right now I still have the screws run in all the way, so the chassis is stiff and tight. I'm probably going to go in and end up taking like a whole turn out of every one of these side plate screws, other than like the motor mount and stuff, obviously. That way the chassis can flex more, and you'll actually, the chassis can act as a little bit of a suspension at that point. But other than that, guys, that's pretty much it. Super excited about this build. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I got this car kit from Moonville, and I've had it sitting there for not quite a year, but it was real close to a year. Pretty much waiting for the outdoor season of 2021 to get here. So really looking forward to that. I'm going to be bringing you some racing footage with these from some tracks that I have not featured on the channel yet, and some tracks that I'm super excited to get to and visit. I've been wanting to visit there for a while, but this year's been a lot more busy than I had anticipated. But as always, guys, I greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Hope you enjoyed this build. Hope to see some more of you subscribers and viewers at some tracks I'm going to be traveling to this year. Can't wait to get out to it. Got some more videos coming up, prepping for some other things too, and racing racing footage. So you guys stay tuned. Again, I greatly appreciate each and every single one of you, and I'll catch you guys next time.